What if I told you that a nation once richer than any kingdom on earth was destroyed not by poverty, but by too much gold? A fortune so vast it blinded kings, fueled wars, and built cathedrals of pure arrogance. A flood of treasure that promised eternal glory, and instead unleashed the greatest inflation in human history. This is not a myth. It happened to Spain, the empire that conquered half the world, ruled the oceans, and believed that gold was power itself. From the mountains of Potosi in South America to the royal vaults of Madrid, millions of coins poured in, each one shimmering with the illusion of endless wealth. But behind every glittering shipment lay a hidden curse. The more gold Spain mined, the poorer it became. As the flow of riches grew, prices soared. Farmers couldn't afford bread, merchants abandoned their crafts, and the Spanish crown drowned in debt, paying for wars it could no longer win. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe watched, and quietly grew rich from Spain's mistake. England, France, and the Netherlands learned that true wealth wasn't found in gold, but in production, innovation, and trade. How could the world's most powerful empire fall victim to its own success? How did the treasures of the New World become the chain that dragged Spain into ruin? Tonight, we uncover the hidden paradox of history. When too much wealth becomes a curse, and gold, the symbol of power, becomes the spark that ignites collapse. To understand how Spain drowned in its own wealth, we must go back to the dawn of its empire, a time when the world itself was being redrawn. The year was 1492. While Columbus set sail across the Atlantic under the Spanish flag, Spain had just completed its centuries-long reconquista, expelling the last Muslim kingdom from the Iberian Peninsula. A new sense of destiny filled the air, the belief that Spain had been chosen by God to rule not only Europe, but the world. And soon, that dream began to take shape in gold. As Spanish explorers reached the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America, they discovered civilizations rich beyond imagination: the Aztecs, the Incas, the Maya. In their temples and tombs lay mountains of precious metals, ornaments, and jewelry. Ship after ship began crossing the Atlantic loaded with treasure, landing in Seville, the beating heart of Spain's imperial economy. Every year, hundreds of tons of gold and silver were unloaded, stamped with the royal seal, and poured into Europe's markets. For a moment, it seemed Spain had achieved what every ruler in history had desired: infinite wealth. Kings believed that with enough gold, they could buy armies, allies, and power itself. But beneath that golden glow, a silent danger was already forming, one that no empire had ever faced before: too much money. At first, the arrival of gold and silver seemed like a miracle. Spanish ports overflowed with wealth, merchants celebrated, and the royal treasury boasted of endless reserves. But as the ships kept coming, something strange began to happen. Prices across Europe started to rise, slowly at first, then relentlessly. A loaf of bread that once cost 1 coin now cost 3. Tools, clothes, and food became more expensive every year. The cause was invisible yet unstoppable: inflation. Spain had released so much gold and silver into circulation that money itself began to lose its value. The more coins people had, the less each one could buy. Historians later called this the price revolution, a century-long wave of inflation that transformed Europe between 1500 and 1650. It was one of the first great monetary crises in human history, and it started with Spain's obsession for treasure. While Spanish nobles lived lavishly on easy wealth, the country's real economy began to rot from within. Local industries, unable to compete with cheaper imports from the Netherlands and England, collapsed. Spain was rich in gold, but poor in production. Ironically, the very metals Spain had bled to extract from the New World were flowing straight into the hands of its rivals. And the empire that once ruled the seas was unknowingly funding the rise of its future competitors. The fever began with a single discovery: a glimmer of metal in the distant lands of the New World. By the early 1500s, Spain's conquistadors had overthrown mighty empires in the Americas. Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztecs in Mexico. Francisco Pizarro brought down the Incas in Peru. From their temples and palaces came unimaginable quantities of gold, silver, and jewels, all claimed in the name of the Spanish crown. But the true turning point came in 1545, when a local shepherd in the high Andes stumbled upon a mountain made almost entirely of silver, Potosi, in present-day Bolivia. The news spread like wildfire. Within years, Potosi became one of the richest cities on earth, a city of tens of thousands of miners, merchants, and fortune seekers. From this mountain alone, More than 40,000 tons of pure silver were extracted over the next century. Each year, entire fleets of ships, the Spanish galleons, sailed across the Atlantic, escorted by warships to protect their shining cargo. For Spain, it was as if heaven itself had opened its vaults. The crown imposed a tax called the quinto real, taking 1/5 of all American treasure directly into the royal treasury. Cathedrals were built, palaces expanded, and wars financed with gold from lands thousands of miles away. The empire grew vast and proud. From Manila to Mexico, from Seville to Lima, everything glittered with Spanish wealth. But beneath the grandeur, something darker took root, an illusion of power built on a resource that could never last. The machine that printed riches had begun, but soon it would start consuming itself. At first, Spain seemed unstoppable. The endless flow of gold and silver turned the empire into the richest power in Europe. But the same treasure that filled its vaults began to rot its foundations. By the late 1500s, the Spanish economy had changed, and not for the better. With ships constantly arriving from the Americas, people grew addicted to easy wealth. Why produce when gold arrived by itself? Why work when silver could buy anything? Local industries began to disappear. Artisans abandoned their workshops, farmers left their lands, and merchants stopped investing in production. Spain no longer made, it only bought. The flood of bullion flooded markets with money, but not with goods. Prices began to soar. A loaf of bread that once cost 1 real soon cost 3. Wages failed to keep pace. The poor grew poorer, while the nobility spent fortunes on imported luxuries from France, Italy, and the Netherlands. Historians call it the price revolution, the first great inflation in European history. Between 1500 and 1600, prices in Spain quadrupled, while real wages collapsed. The gold that was supposed to make Spain rich was quietly bleeding its strength away. Meanwhile, other nations, England, France, and the Netherlands, learned to profit from Spain's weakness. They sold Spain the very goods it no longer produced: fabrics, tools, ships, weapons. Spain paid in silver, draining its own reserves. The gold left as quickly as it arrived. And when wars came, against England, against the Dutch rebels, against the Turks, Spain had no industrial base to support them. It had treasure, yes, but no economy. The empire was still shining, but that brilliance was just the reflection of a candle before it burned out. By the early 1600s, the illusion of endless wealth had shattered. Spain, once feared, admired, and envied, was drowning in debt. The royal treasury was empty, and the same gold that once dazzled the world had turned into a curse of dependence. The crown, desperate to fund wars and its lavish court, borrowed massive sums from foreign bankers, especially the Fugger and Genoese families. But when the flow of silver from the Americas slowed, Spain could no longer pay. In 1557, 1575, 1596, and again in 1607, Spain declared bankruptcy, 4 times in less than 50 years. Each bankruptcy sent shockwaves through Europe. Merchants lost faith in the Spanish crown, credit collapsed, and interest rates soared. Spain had become the world's richest debtor nation. At home, misery spread. Inflation devoured wages, taxes grew unbearable, and famine struck repeatedly. Fields lay abandoned. Entire towns emptied as people fled to the cities or joined the armies. Even the church, once overflowing with gold, began to feel the pinch. But the tragedy wasn't just economic, it was cultural. Spain's elites despised manual labor, glorifying noble blood over productive work. The empire turned inward, trapped in pride and nostalgia. While England and the Netherlands built powerful trade networks and industries, Spain clung to its past glories. By the time the last galleons crossed the Atlantic, bringing less and less treasure, the damage was done. The country that had possessed more gold than any in history was now weak, divided, and dependent. The mighty empire that had conquered half the world couldn't conquer its own greed. Its downfall became a silent warning. Wealth without production, power without balance, and ambition without foresight are the seeds of collapse. Spain had found El Dorado, only to discover it was made of quicksand. The story of Spain's golden curse didn't end in the 17th century. It simply changed form. Today, nations no longer sail across oceans for treasure, they print it. Central banks flood economies with trillions of digital dollars, euros, and yen, believing that more liquidity means more prosperity. But just like Spain's gold, easy money breeds illusion, not wealth. When Spain's galleons unloaded tons of silver in Seville, prices soared while productivity stagnated. 5 centuries later, the same pattern repeats. Governments inject capital, markets rise, but real value, innovation, production, stability, often falls behind. The 2008 financial crisis, the pandemic stimulus packages, and today's record-high global debt echo the same melody of excess. Economies inflate, speculation dominates, and societies become addicted to abundance. The difference is that instead of gold coins, we now have quantitative easing and crypto bubbles. And just as Spain became dependent on its colonies, modern nations rely on foreign credit and cheap imports to sustain their lifestyles. The result? A fragile prosperity built on paper promises. Spain's mistake was believing that money itself was wealth, that owning gold meant owning power. Today, humanity faces the same illusion, only digitized. When value becomes detached from effort, when consumption replaces creation, decline is only a matter of time. The past whispers a warning. Every empire that confuses wealth with abundance ends up poor. Whether it's a galleon full of gold or a server full of virtual dollars, the law is the same: what comes easy, corrupts easily. Spain's golden age was, in truth, a gilded illusion, a moment when wealth blinded wisdom and abundance erased effort. The empire that ruled the seas was undone not by foreign armies, but by its own misunderstanding of value. Gold, like money, was never true wealth. It was only a mirror reflecting the strength of those who used it wisely. And when that reflection turned to greed, Spain saw its own downfall staring back. From the mines of Potosi to the palaces of Madrid, history carved its lesson deep. A nation that consumes more than it creates eventually devours itself. Today, we stand at a similar crossroads. We build digital empires, trade invisible currencies, and call it progress. But the question remains, have we learned from the curse of gold, or are we writing its sequel in real time? Because wealth without purpose is still poverty in disguise. So, as you reflect on Spain's fate, ask yourself, are we any different today, or just more sophisticated in our illusions? If this story made you think, subscribe, because the next chapter in the history of money may already be unfolding, and you'll want to understand it before it happens again.